Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And one question I get asked quite a bit when it comes to making skirts for little girls is, what size squares do you use and how many, and how do you figure it out? How do you figure it out by length and width? What I'm going to talk about is going to be how to customize the basic patchwork skirt. I have kind of a one size fits most skirt, and how can you customize that to fit people who are smaller or larger, and we're going to talk about that. Now what I have right here are 3 tiers ready to go together for a girl's skirt. In this particular skirt I decided to use 10-inch squares, but I'm only working in increments of 5 rather than 6 like I do with the adult skirts. Typically the first tier is 6, so then everything is in increments of 6. So it would be 6, 12, 24, and 48 for a 4-tier skirt. And then for the 3-tier, obviously it would stop at the 24. Now since this is in increments of 5, this is going to go 5 for the first tier, 10 for the second tier, and 20 for the third tier. But I'm still using 10-inch squares on this. But you can go smaller squares or still do the 6 increments of 6 and do even smaller squares. But you've got to decide what it is you want to do, what's the length you want, and what's the width. Now you have to keep in mind that, like the way I tried to design the girl skirts, is I like to make them, and this goes for adult skirts too, plenty wide enough that they're not too bulky for someone who's tiny, but also wide enough to fit people of larger sizes. And this especially applies for making a skirt for a young girl. You want to give her room to grow, and I like to do this specifically for skirts that people order up for me. When I make the skirt for a young girl, I want it to go clear to the ground when they get it, so that as they grow they'll still be able to wear it for a long period of time, and then also have it fit up to maybe a 45-inch hips and waist, but be able to cinch it up to fit maybe an 18-inch waist, and so that they can wear it for a very long period of time. And it still looks cute even when there's lots of fabric gathered up there, or when they grow and they're filling it out a little bit more. That's the beauty of this style of skirt. So how do you figure this out? Well, let me go back to starting with how to figure out how to make it bigger when making an adult skirt without having to add so much more fullness, because we already know for an adult 4-tier skirt it's going to be a minimum of 7 yards and up to 10. My skirts will fit up to 55 inches, but right to 55-inch hips and waist. So I've changed that, so now it says 53 to allow a couple inches. If someone's 53 inches at the hips and waist, they know they've got a couple inches of play there. So what if somebody contacts me and says, well, I already, my hips are right at 50 or maybe 56 or larger. What do I do to accommodate them without having to add so much more fabric to the skirts? Some people think, well, just go bigger squares all the way down. Well, no, you don't want to do that, because again, you're coming back to the problem. The skirts are already quite a bit of fabric. Even making 11 by 11 inch squares or 10 by 11 inch rectangles, you're talking about a lot of fabric by the time you get down to that 4th tier with the 48 squares around there. So all you need to do is add your width, or if you're wanting the skirt to be longer, because typically my skirts are 34 inches long, maybe you want it to be 36 inches long, you make a rectangle just in the top tier. So the top tier can go for someone who's taller but doesn't need extra width. They can go 12-inch by 10-inch rectangles with the rectangle going vertically. And that'll add 2 inches to the overall length of the skirt. As I just had a lady that specifically wanted 36 inches in length of her skirt, and so that's all I had to do, and I didn't have to charge her anymore for that, because I'm only adding 2 inches to those tops, 2 inches each to the top 6 squares. Now the same thing goes if it's someone who wants the same length but wants it wider. I might make 12 or 11 by 10-inch squares. It just depends on how much more they want. and then turn them sideways. So they're going to go horizontally. So if they feel like they need 6 inches more, then I'm going to do 11 by 10. If they need more than that, then I'm going to do 12 by 10 inch squares, or rectangles rather, and then turn them sideways. So then what happens with the rest of the rows if I do them all 10 by 10s? Well, all it is you simply on the second tier is you're going to gather your squares a little bit less on that second tier. Because for the patchwork skirt, you already have to gather more than you would for just a solid skirt to get all your seams to line up nicely. That's why it makes it so much more fabric. So you just gather a little bit less on that second tier, and then when you go to add the third and fourth tiers, you're going to gather it the same as you would. Either way, you're matching up your seams. So you're matching up your seams. Let's see, here's the first tier. Okay, so I'm just going to show you the two squares on the first tier, and I'm not going to take apart the second tier because I don't want to confuse myself. And then on the second tier, you're going to gather it so that it matches, each seam is going to match up. So you're going to have these straight lines. Now if you're confused about this and you haven't seen my previous how to make a patchwork skirt video, go ahead and check that out. Okay, so now back to the little girl skirt. So how do you figure it out? So you're talking about a little girl. What you want to do is get your tape measure and measure from where she's typically going to wear her skirt, on her waist or on her hips. That's sometimes a mistake people make, is they'll measure from the waist, but if the little girl is most likely to wear it on her hips, you want to make sure that you measure from there. Either that, or she's going to have to start wearing her skirt on her waist at least for a while until she grows into it. So measure from wherever it is that she wears her skirts, and keep in mind this is an elastic drawstring waist, and then all the way down to the length to where you want the skirt to end. So if you want it to end right just above the ground, measure to there. If you want it to end right at her ankles, measure to there. Okay, so let's say that length comes out to be 21 inches. So you got to figure out, first of all, how many tiers are you going to do and how many squares do you want to do. Again, I do for girl skirts, I always do 3 tiers, and I'll do my squares anywhere from 8 to 10 inches depending on the overall size. So what I need to do is I need to take that 21 inches and I'm going to add 2 inches to the length to account for the folding over twice at the waist, because you got to fold over once, about a ½ inch first, and then fold it over another full inch. And I always like to be generous, and I'll just say 2 inches, but if you want to be more precise, go 1.5 inches. But I'm just going to go 2 inches in this case. So I take 21 and plus 2, that's 23 inches long. Now I also have to account for the seams, the seam allowance. So I typically allow at least 1 inch at each seam. So I've got 3 tiers, so I'm going to have a seam here, and I'm going to have a seam here between the top tier. Usually I'll just count 1 inch for each tier. So that's 1, 2, 3. So right now we're at 23 inches plus another 3 inches is 26 inches. And then you may want to count a little bit more for the actual hem. But 26 inches should give you the amount you need once you add all that together and figure that in, and that's just kind of a rounded off figure, and this usually works pretty good for me. Now you're going to take that 26 inches, 26, and you're going to divide it by the amount of tiers that you're using. And so what you're going to come to is 8.6 inch size squares. So I would go 8.5 or even 9, just depending on how much play you allowed for yourself there. If you figured bigger when you're added all these inches up, then go with an 8.5 inch square. If you were not being so generous, then go with a 9 inch square, because the thing is, you can still make adjustments as you go to make it fit better once you have the skirt all together. Now, the same thing applies when you're figuring out width. So if I'm going with 5 squares around at the top, I want to decide, okay, so how much play do I want them to have? I want this to fit them for a long time. So let's say I want it to be 40 inches around. And trust me, that sounds huge, but you can gather it up and it's still going to look very cute. But let's say 40 inches around for that. That's got to accommodate the widest part. So hips and waist. Okay, typically a little girl, usually her waist is where she's widest at. And so, but make sure you measure both and then go by the largest size and then add several more inches to that to give her room to grow. We'll go ahead and say 40 inches. So I'm going to take 40 inches and I'm going to add to that the amount of squares I'm using, 5 squares across, because that's going to give me my seam allowance. So 40 plus 5 is 45 inches. Okay, so now, now that I've done that, I know how much I need around to end up with about 40 inches. So now I'm going to take that 45 inches and divide it again by the number of squares I'm using around. 45 divided by 5 is 9. So here, 9-inch squares sounds like the perfect size for getting about a 21-inch length and 40 inches around so that she has plenty of room to grow. And yes, you should be able to cinch it up to about 18 inches or less, depending on how you do your drawstring. You want to make sure you don't put too big of a piece of elastic in there at the back. If you're going to do this sewing the elastic to the draw and then a drawstring on each end, I would keep it about maybe somewhere between 6 and 8 inches tops on that elastic in the back if you're wanting to be able to cinch it up pretty small. So I don't know if that's making any sense, but that should give you a pretty good idea. So now let's say you've put your skirt together, you've got, you decided to go with 9-inch squares because you wanted to be generous, maybe allow a little extra for the seam allowance, a little extra in case you made a mistake, and then you get it all together, but don't do the waist yet. Just put the 3 tiers together, don't hem it yet either. And then try it on, whoever's going to wear it, or if nothing else, because obviously in my case I can't try it on. Once I get to that point, I measure the skirt from the top to the bottom and see what length I have. That's going to tell me how much I have left to do my hem and my waist. Now I should have more than enough at that point for the hem and the waist. So then maybe I'll go ahead and do the hem. Then I'll measure it again. Now, if I need to cut some off the top, that's where I'm going to do it. It's better to have the top part be shorter than to have the bottom part be shorter. So if it looks like I get it all together, I do the hem and I measure it and figure in what my waist is going to be after I fold it over twice, and it still looks like it's going to be way too long, it's going to be dragging on the ground, then I'll cut whatever I need to cut off the top tier, and then I'll go ahead and put that waist in. And usually that comes out just right. But the key is to make sure you're measuring every time. Measure every single time. Because when, again, when it comes to a little girl skirt, you're wanting her to wear it for as long as possible. If you're going to put the time and the money into the skirt, you want to make sure that she's going to be able to wear it for a long period of time. So having it go clear to her ankles at least, I recommend that. And then, but obviously you don't want it too long or she's going to be tripping on it, stomping on it, and, getting it dirty and tearing it and stuff like that. Now, back to making an adult skirt. If you're needing it to be longer than 36 inches, then let's say you need to add 4 inches to the overall skirt. Then I recommend going 10 by 11 for every single section of the skirt. So every rectangle, you're not going to have squares. Every part of the skirt that you cut out or rip out is going to be 10 by 11, and making sure that you're going 11 inches this way. Okay, so that's one way to do it. Another way to do it, which is what I did for someone else, is I added 2 inches to the top tier and then 2 inches to the bottom tier and left the center tiers 10 by 10. So I did 10 by 12 for the top and 10 by 12 for the bottom. And the reason for that is that once you hem it up, the bottom tier and the top tier always are going to look shorter than the 2 middle tiers anyway. So if you add most of your length to either the top or the top and the bottom, then that's going to give a better overall look to the skirt when you do it that way. but it's just a matter of choice, whatever's easiest for you. There's a couple of ideas, something that you can work with, and I will also be doing a separate video on how to add the hidden interior pockets to the sides of the skirts. And I've been doing that. I just came up with the pattern, I just drew it out, made it, started putting it in, figured it out on my own. And it's relatively simple, but there is a little bit of a trick. So I had to try it a few different ways before I could find the easiest way to get the pocket into the skirt where it can come together smoothly and quickly and not take too much extra time. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned something new, and I hope you found it helpful. Thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.